Hey folks, this is Cindy. Thanks so much for stopping by. Today's video is a one-layer Copic color card, super easy, super quick to put together, and I'll talk about that here more in a minute. I'm going to be using the Simon Says Stamp Strangeness stamp set. This is from the recent Good Vibes release. You guys have to check out this release. It was pretty spectacular. My favorite from the release was this stamp set. Aside from the fact that I'm just a total floral junkie, I just simply love everything about this. I love the size of it. This is a 6x8-inch stamp set, so it's huge. And you guys will get a little bit more perspective here in a moment when you see me start on my card. I love the birds on this. I love that they have included separate flowers in here so you could do some things with those. The sentiments on these are just off the hook, as well as the lettering itself is just gorgeous, and we'll talk about that more here as we go along. All right, so I'm going to be using a Misty stamping tool because this is a large stamp. Look at that. It is taking up almost the entire panel. This is 4¼ inches by 5½. It is Copic Express paper, and I'm only using that because that's what was handy at the time. Nino Solar White cardstock would work as well. Because I'm going to be doing some Copic coloring, I'm going to be using the Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink, and I did triple stamp this. I wanted it nice and dark and black. I also wanted this to be a nice bold color. These flowers are so big that you could absolutely pull off these deeper, bolder colors. So I'm going to use my favorite. It's the RV 63, 66, and 69. I'm going to start this in real time, and then I am going to speed this up. It didn't take that long to color, and it didn't take that long to color for a couple reasons. Number one, it is such a large image. Number two, I really didn't put a lot of effort into it. I'm at the point in our move, folks, I got to be honest. I'm at the point in this move where we are just ready to hit a wall. I mean, we're done with the whole thing, and we are so tired that we can't even stand ourselves. So when I sat down to color this card, I couldn't really even focus. So I'm just kind of going with the flow. I honestly didn't give a lot of attention to detail, and that is one of my favorites about stamp sets like this and about this stamp set. There's so much going on. There's just enough detail illustrated in it that you don't have to put a lot of detail into it, into your coloring. It's kind of done for you, and nobody's going to notice if you don't, because it's a fairly busy image. Nobody's going to look at this and think that your highlights and your shadows and all of that is off. So I just didn't concern myself with it. So it made it that much easier to throw together. Plus, it's big. Bigger images just have a tendency to color up a whole lot faster. I'm starting with my RV 69. This is, for the moment, my darkest shadow color. And I'm just kind of mapping out where I want them to go. I do go in a little bit later and add just a wee bit more shadow with a BV25. We'll talk about that when we get there. But for the time being, I'm just kind of adding it down in the nooks and crannies. I'm not doing anything spectacular. There's no special technique here, folks. In some cases, I'm using the very tip of my marker, which is why you can't see what I'm doing, because I'm holding that marker almost straight up and down, and I'm just adding these fine little lines in there. Some of these are pretty tight spaces, so I can't really bring those lines out too far, and that's totally fine. I'm just using the tip of my marker here and getting in those nooks and crannies, because I do want them to read pretty dark when everything is colored in. But I also need to make sure that I'm giving myself plenty of white space there so I can maintain that highlight. So I'm not putting in a whole lot of detail into this. Like, this is definitely not my best coloring ever, and that's totally fine. But I am taking enough care to make sure that once everything is colored in, I still have that movement in this flower. So the eye is still going to be able to see that those shadows are going to recede, the highlights are going to come forward. You can see where some of these petals fold in on themselves or back on themselves. I'm keeping that in mind as I color. So as I said, I'm going to show you part of this in real time. I know you guys like to be able to see some of this in real time. It kind of helps you understand what I'm doing a little bit better, but I definitely needed to speed this up. I needed to be able to get it down in a more manageable video. All in all, this card took me about 45 minutes from start to finish, so it really wasn't that bad, but I really didn't want to put up a 45-minute video. So I do need to speed some of this up. I'm just going to do the same thing on all of those petals with those fine little lines, maybe stretching out some of that shadow a little bit more as I go. Again, I'm going to be bringing in that BV25 here soon, and we'll talk about that when I get there. The other flower is also colored the same exact way, so I'm only going to show you this one flower. The other one is done the same exact way. You could definitely color these flowers in different colors if you would like. You wouldn't have to use the same color on both of them. But as I was saying, with these larger images like this is your opportunity to go big or go home. You can definitely pull off those big, bold colors on images like these. This is your focal point on your card. So you can really take the opportunity to make that stand out. After I had all that RV69 in there, I'm bringing in my RV66. This is my mid-tone, and I'm just going to stretch those out just a little bit. I'm still trying to maintain as much of that highlight as I possibly can. Now, I did notice while I was doing this, for some reason, my blending was kind of funky. I think that I really need to fill up my markers. I haven't been able to do that in a while, so I'm thinking that that was part of the deal, but I have a fix for that. And then also, don't forget, guys, whenever you are coloring with Copic markers, because they are transparent, you can continue to go over that until you get the blend that you want. Another great tip is going tip to tip with your Copic markers. So I could have taken my RV66, touched the tip of that marker to my RV69, and it would have created a mid-tone out of those two colors, and that would have helped a bunch. I just didn't take the time to do it. At this point, I pretty much know that I'm going to be bringing in, at this point, I thought I'd be bringing in a C5, and then I changed my mind and brought in a BV25. So I knew I was going to be able to go back and re-blend this before I called it good with it. So I wasn't too worried about it, but there's definitely things you could do along the way to fix that if you're having that problem. Now that I'm done with my RV66, I'm going in with my RV63. It's really hard to see because I have this sped up, but I am literally just coloring this on. I'm almost scrubbing this on. I just need to get it on there. It doesn't matter if I leave any white on the paper. I'm not trying to do anything special. I am just getting that RV63 on there. I also see where I do have some lines on there where it's pretty harsh between my RV63 and my RV66. So I bring back in that RV66 just a little bit more, add a few flicking motions, especially on those petals that are open and kind of concave in the center there, because I do want to have a little bit of feathering in there. I think it would look a little bit better. Now, here's where I'm bringing in the BV25, and on some of these, I'm stretching it out quite a bit. Again, those ones that are pretty much open, but still kind of on the concave side, I'm adding the BV25 quite a bit to those. I'm bringing it out just a little bit. On those tighter ones, on the tighter petals that are much closer together, it's the same thing that I did with the RV69. I'm just using the very tip of my marker, getting in those nooks and crannies. Now, it's going to look kind of strange in some of those areas. You're definitely going to be able to see that this is a BV25 and not a part of that natural blending group of the RVs, and that's okay. Because this has a violet base to it, you're going to be able to go back over this with your RV66 or your RV63 and blend that out, and what you're going to see is not the BV color. You're going to see that it's just a deeper, darker shadow. Look how much more dimension this has. Now, I do want my highlights to look just a wee bit lighter. So at this point, I know that I'm going to be bringing in a white colored pencil. Now, I can't find my colored pencils just yet, but I did have my Derwent drawing pencil sitting here on my desk as the Chinese white. I've talked about this in videos before, but if you're not familiar with it, it's kind of it's not your traditional colored pencil. It is more like, I've heard it described as soap, and that's pretty much legit. Once you get that pencil on there, do not color over the top of it with your Copic marker. So keep it for the last thing that you're going to do, but it will make a difference, and you'll see that here more in just a few moments. In the meantime, I'm going to start coloring in these leaves. I'm going to use my traditional G12, G14, G17, and G29. They are just what happen to be sitting out. And also this green combination that looks gorgeous with these RVs. I tend to pair these together quite often because they look so well together. Today was just no different. So I'm mapping this out with my G29. This is my darkest shadow color. And I know normally I will start with my lightest, map it out, then go in with my darkest and work my way back out to my lightest. Lately, I've gotten really lazy and I skip that lighter color first and just go directly in with my darkest. If you have a good cardstock, you really don't need to use a lighter color or go lighter to darker, darker to lighter, or however you do it. You don't typically need to do that if you have a good cardstock. It helps a bunch if you're heavy-handed and you're nervous about adding too much dark. It definitely helps to map it out with a lighter color. Most of the time, I'm pretty confident enough that I don't need to do that. And lately, I've just been skipping it altogether. But if you're nervous at all, definitely map it out with your lightest, then go in with your darkest, work your way back out to your lightest, and you'll be good to go. So I mapped that out with the G29. I made sure that the darkest was right down in the center, and I'm using the illustrated lines as a guide for my darkest color. Then I went in with that G17. Now I have the G14, and I'm leaving myself a little bit of white space here so I can bring it in with my G12. At this point, I'm only using that G12 where there was legitimate white on the paper. G12 will actually lift those darker colors, and I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to lose any of that darkness, so I just stuck to where it was white, blended it in a little bit to that G14, and called it good. So on these other leaves, I'm using a YG 93, 95, and a 97. Now, this ends up being a little bit more olive than what I would prefer. I definitely wanted something that had a yellow base to it because I knew that I was going to be coloring these last two flowers in yellow, so I wanted something that would complement that. If you look at the color wheel, the yellow, the red, violet, the green, and the yellow green actually all go together. However, this blending combination wasn't quite yellow enough. So after I get these colored, as I'm finishing up this card, I actually bring in a YG03. What I would do instead, if I were to do this card again, what I would do instead I would use the YG03, the YG95, and the YG97 and call it good. It works out in the end, so that's fine, but if I were to do it again, I would definitely keep that in mind. Again, I started with my darkest shadow color. That was the YG97. Now I'm bringing in the YG95. I'll finish that off with the YG93. And it's nothing fancy, folks. I went straight up the middle with that YG97, brought it out along the edges with that YG95, a lot like a Christmas tree. And now I'm just simply coloring over the top of all of it with the YG93 and go in later with the YG03, call it good. Okay, so now I'm ready to color in these little flowers, and I'm going to color these in yellow. I have a Y11, Y15, and a YR24. Yellows can be kind of tricky with Copic colors. It's really hard to get depth with them. There are a couple things you could do, but the YR24, if you want just a pretty basic blending combination, these three colors work together pretty good. You can get quite a bit of depth and dimension with this YR24. It's pretty handy. I do end up bringing in a V12 later. I go over the top of where I'm putting this YR24. Then I re-add the YR24 over the top of that, blend it out a little bit more with that Y11. And what you actually end up getting with that color combination is a deeper, darker shadow. It makes the centers of those flowers look like they're recessed down there a little bit more than just the Y11, Y15 and YR24. If you don't have a V12, that's totally fine. The YR24 is still a pretty handy yellow Copic to have in your arsenal. So I always make sure that I kind of throw this in with my yellows. After I had that YR24 in there, I went in with that Y15, stretched it out a little bit more. Now I'm going to finish it off with the Y11, and then I'm going to call it good. You could definitely do other things with these flowers, like those little strips that are coming right up the center of those. Those would be kind of groovy if you colored them in another color. I'm not entirely certain what this flower is, so I'm just kind of taking whatever creative license I can think of and just coloring them in. And that's just fine too. After I had those colored in, we are done with this portion of the coloring. So now I'm going to add a faux frame to this. I have an idea of what I wanted to do with the sentiment that's in the stamp set. It's a long sentiment and I wanted to be able to split it up, and there's lots of different things you could do with that, but I thought it would be really cool, especially with the style of writing that it is, to be able to split that up and use it as a part of my border. So I'm taking my T-ruler and I'm just coming in 1/2 inch from the edge, and I'm going to go all the way around that. I'm going to lightly trace this in with a pencil. I am going to make sure that I skip the line there with my the image with the pencil. Sorry about getting my head in the way. I needed to get right over the top of that and make sure that I had this nice and even. Again, 1/2 inch in, lightly tracing this in with a pencil. I'm going to go back over this later with a pen, and we'll talk about that more here in just a minute. So the sentiment reads, "There is no beauty without some strangeness," by Edgar Allan Poe. And I love, 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 love this sentiment. And I love the handwriting of it. And I thought it would be brilliant to be able to split this up. So I need it to have this line here. I already have the idea in my head that I'm going to center that a portion of the sentiment right in the middle where I have that line drawn. So it's going to actually bring it down a little bit lower. So I have all of this image in the upper right, or I'm sorry, the upper left-hand corner of my card panel. So I can afford to bring down that sentiment just below that line, and it will look a balance. So it's not going to look like I have all of this white space down here in the corner of my card panel. It would be fine if I did, but I wanted to be able to balance this out a little bit with this sentiment. So I'm just going to get these drawn in here. Normally I skip through this, but I really wanted to take a minute and show you guys exactly how I do this. I think faux borders are probably the coolest thing that you could put on a card. Plus they're easy. They're quick, they're easy, they add a little bit of extra impact to your card, and you don't have to dig out a bunch of embellishments. I dig it. So I wanted to take a minute and show that to you guys. Now, once I had that drawn in there, I'm going to bring in my Misty stamping tool so I can stamp this sentiment. If you have an acrylic block, you can totally do this. You're just going to need to be able to line this up really well and look straight down the center of your block to get this straight. But a Misty stamping tool helps a bunch. So I'm going to place this in my Misty. I have it all the way over to the edge there because of this sentiment. Again, it's pretty long, so I know that it's going to be sticking out the right side of my card panel there. So I moved it all the way over to the left side of my Misty there. And I want this to stop at "there is no beauty without." And then the other portion of that is going to go from the bottom right to the top right of my card panel. You're going to see what I'm talking about here in just a moment. I could cut this stamp, but that freaks me out. So I'm just going to use some Post-it labeling tape and mask off the portion of this that I don't need. The other thing that I don't show you in the video is after I stamp this the first time, I bring in some Hero Art stamp cleaner and I clean my stamp really well before I move on to the second part of my sentiment so nothing transfers. And I make sure I clean that really good with the stamp cleaner and a baby wipe. I am also using W+9 black ink. It is one of my favorite inks for sentiments because it stamps nice and crisp and black the first time. It's always good to go. Now that I have that first portion of the stamp on there, I have the second portion lined up. I did have to move this in my Misty, but it's no big deal. I have it nice and secured with my magnets. I am going to stamp the second part of this, and I made sure it lined up so it was even with the other portion of it. Hopefully that makes sense. Take a good look at the pictures on my blog if you have any questions on that. I probably could have moved it up just a teensy weensy bit. No big deal. For the rest of that outline there, I'm going back in with my T ruler and an EK Success journaling pen, and I'm just tracing over the top of that. I am making sure that I don't take it all the way up to that stamped sentiment. I want it to have a little bit of a gap so it looks like it has some continuity. There is a dash between the sentiment or the quote and pose, so I wanted it to kind of have the same amount of space in it and kind of give it a little bit of balance. And because I just can't help myself, I have to add a drop shadow. I actually sat here for about 3 minutes tapping my fingers trying to decide if I was going to add a drop shadow to this. I really thought for a moment there that I would skip it, but again, I can't help myself. No card of mine is complete without one, so I'm going to add a drop shadow. If you follow me, you're probably familiar with this. If you're new here, I almost always start with a C3, map that out, go in with the C5, go back to the C3, use the C1, blend it out with a C00, and if necessary, I go in with a colorless blender. Today, I'm skipping a step here, and I am just going directly in with my C5. This is my darkest shadow color. I'm just adding it pretty thin, pretty light in those darkest shadow areas. I'm not really focusing on a light source per se. In fact, I think some of this is not consistent at all. I just want this to have shadow in it. It's no big deal. If you were to go in the top right, you would make sure that all of your shadow would come in from the bottom left. If you did a top left drop shadow, you would go in, add all of your shadow in from the bottom right. I'm just kind of adding it where I want to, kind of filling in some of that white space and calling it good. Once I have that C3, or I'm sorry, the C5 in there, I'm coming in with the C3 and I'm stretching those out quite a bit more. I kind of decided as I was finishing up that C5 that I actually wanted quite a bit of this in there, so I am going in a little bit heavier than what I normally would. At this point, I would typically still pretty much be using the tip of my marker, but this time I have my marker leaned over quite a bit more, kind of stretching that out quite a bit. I can afford to do so. I have lots of white space on here. Now I'm coming in with my C1, blending out that C3 and that C5 quite a bit. I will bring in my C00. I did have some areas that were on the dark side, so I do bring in my colorless blender and kind of work at those a little bit, push them back a little bit and lighten them up just a little bit. And then I call it good. At this point, you could pretty much call it quits with this card. You could mount it on your card base and call it a day. You wouldn't need to add any other embellishments, anything else to this card. It would just simply be good to go. That is the nice thing, another nice thing about doing a large floral images like this. They really take center stage. You don't have to step them up or amp them up or add a bunch of other things to them. You could just color it in, put it on your card base, and you have yourself a really spectacular card. However, I don't know when to quit. So I wanted a little bit more highlight on those petals of those red violet flowers. So this is where I'm bringing in that Derwent drawing pencil. Again, this is the Chinese white. This is a really nice stark white. It's kind of a, it's quite opaque. Again, it's a lot like soap. Once you put it down, you can really see it. It will leave, even if you erase it, it will leave a little bit of a stain or a residue behind. Not much, but it's still there. But I'll tell you, if you are looking for something to add in a really quick highlight, there's other techniques that you can do with this drawing pencil. But if you're looking to add some really quick highlights to your project, that drawing pencil is definitely the way to go. So after I had all the flowers done with the drawing pencil, I came in with the Nuvo Aqua Shimmer pen, added a ton of shimmer because we love shimmer. And then I just added that to the highlights of those petals as well as the highlights in all of the leaves. Then I took a Sakura Stardust gel pen and went over the centers of those yellow flowers. It gives it a little bit of a silvery shimmer, but it's still transparent enough. You can see that yellow through it. Now I have a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and I'm adding those dots around that image there just to give it a little bit more detail. I added this to a top folding darling Nina Solar White card base, and I'm going to call it good. That's it, folks. We are done. We are good to go. I hope you enjoyed my card today. If you did, hit that like button and share it with your friends. Also, be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and tap that bell next to the subscribe button so you can receive all future notifications. Thanks again so much for stopping by. Until next time.